This is Story Recapped. Today, I'm going to explain a mystery romance sci-fi film called 222. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. At the Grand Central Terminal in New York, a man pulls out a gun and approaches a woman waiting by the clock. The cops are alerted to his weapon, so a detective confronts him. The woman hides behind the armed man as he defiantly points the gun at the officer. When the clock hits 2:22, the people panic upon hearing the gunshots ringing throughout the station. At 7 a.m., Dylan Branson, an air traffic controller at the JFK International Airport, wakes up and begins his daily routine before going to work. When he turns on the TV, he learns about the collapse of a distant star called Hamill. The reporter notes that the collapse occurred 30 years ago, but astronomers are only seeing it at the present because it took that long for the light to reach Earth. Dylan rides his bike to Grand Central, where he takes the subway to the airport. At work, Dylan uses his talent in seeing patterns to guide pilots when they take off or land. One plane that is about to take off is on the path of another aircraft preparing to land, so Dylan advises the pilot on the incoming plane to reduce his speed. Dylan's colleague bets $10 that the incoming plane would have to turn around, but the departing flight soon takes off, and the other aircraft lands without a problem. That night, Dylan's coworker and ex-girlfriend, Sandy, hands him 2 tickets to an aerial ballet performance as a gift for his birthday, which is 2 weeks away. Sandy won't be joining, however, because she's seeing someone on the night of the performance. Dylan mostly spends his days going through the same routines because he likes seeing patterns. Little does he know, the way he sees the patterns will completely change one day. While working, Dylan starts hallucinating at exactly 2:22 p.m. Dylan sees circular patterns in his surroundings, and he gets a vision of a shootout occurring at the Grand Central. When he snaps out of the vision, his colleagues alert him to an imminent collision of 2 planes. After calculating the outcome in his mind, Dylan tells the incoming plane that it's clear to land and instructs the departing flight to speed up. Sarah, a passenger on the incoming flight, watches the other aircraft with dread as it flies toward their plane's path. Not long, the departing flight takes off and narrowly misses the landing aircraft. Later, Dylan gets suspended indefinitely for almost causing a mid-air collision. The next day, Dylan attends the aerial ballet performance alone. Before the show begins, Sarah catches his attention as she walks to her seat. Dylan can't help but glance at Sarah during the performance. After the show, Dylan approaches Sarah at a bar and offers to buy her a drink. However, Sarah notes that she wants to go somewhere else, so Dylan takes her to a restaurant. Dylan tells Sarah that the aerial ballet reminded him of his father, who was a pilot. As a child, Dylan used to look for flashing stars in the sky and pretended that it was his father looking down at him. When Sarah asks if he wants to be a pilot, he admits that he didn't become one despite having a license because he is afraid to fly. Dylan asks Sarah about her work, so she reveals that she works at an art gallery. However, she admits that she wanted to be a dancer. Later, Dylan reveals that he almost caused an accident at the airport because he got distracted. After Dylan explains the incident, Sarah shares that she was on the incoming flight. Dylan remarks that he nearly killed Sarah, but she contends that he saved her. Before parting ways, Dylan notes that it feels like they've known each other for a long time. The next day, Dylan receives a call from the Grand Central Station because they found his wallet. After fetching his wallet at the station, he hears a man on the PA systems informing passengers that the Millhurst Express is already boarding. When he looks around, he notices a man in a business suit, an elderly couple hugging, a group of schoolchildren, and a pregnant woman standing by the clock. Moments later, the lights begin to flicker. At 2:22, people panic when sparks start flying out of the clock. Later that day, Dylan stops by the art gallery and invites Sarah to dinner. Sarah points out that it's still early, so they walk to Central Park instead. While relaxing at a bench, Sarah shares that she has been dancing since she was 7. During her senior year, she got into an apprenticeship, but she accidentally tore 2 ligaments while performing a dance routine. Dylan doesn't think Sarah can no longer dance, so he plays music on his cell phone and convinces her to dance with him on the street. The dance leads to a kiss, and the couple soon goes to Dylan's home to make love. In the morning, Dylan notices Sarah's pendant. She reveals that it was a birthday gift from her ex-boyfriend. Dylan jokes that he has to do something to outdo him, so he asks her when she's celebrating her next birthday. When Sarah reveals her birthday, Dylan points out that they were both born on April 18, 1986. Suddenly, Dylan hears a car crash in front of the building. After checking the time, Dylan notes that it's the 3rd consecutive day that a crash occurred at the same time and place. When Sarah arrives at the gallery later, her ex-boyfriend, Jonas, notices that she smells nice. Her coworker jokes that it's her pheromones because she's in love. Jonas tells Sarah that he's happy for her, but he can't hide the look of disappointment on his face. During a cab ride to Grand Central, Dylan recognizes a pattern when the reckless driver takes a shortcut. Dylan realizes that the pattern leads to an accident, so he repeatedly asks the driver to stop. The driver gets irritated when Dylan starts yelling at him, so he slams the brake and stops at an intersection. Another vehicle soon crashes into them and overturns their car. Bystanders quickly pull them out of the vehicle. As Dylan gets up, he recalls his vision of the shootout at Grand Central. When Sarah looks at his injuries later that day, Dylan reveals that he has been seeing the same pattern at the train station for the last 3 days. There's always a man in a business suit, a couple hugging, school children passing by, and a pregnant woman by the clock. He hints that there's always some kind of explosion at 2:22. When Dylan was at the station earlier that day, several light bulbs exploded. The following day, Dylan takes notes of the pattern he sees. There's always a drop of water at 9:10 a.m., and then he'll come across a dead bug. At 11:15, there will be a plane flying overhead. Dylan heads to the roof the next day to see if he would still see the same pattern. At exactly 9:10, a drop of water falls from the sky and lands on his notebook. When he inspects the notebook, he finds a dead bug inside. Dylan writes down the patterns again in his windows later that day. Dylan visits Sarah at the gallery that night, but there's a presentation of Jonas's artwork, so she can't speak to him yet. After the preparations for the exhibit, Sarah introduces Dylan to Jonas. When the presentation begins, the audience is dazzled by a holographic rendering of New York City, including the Grand Central Station. The hologram shows the same patterns that Dylan had seen at the station. Dylan accuses Jonas of following him to create his art and hits him. The two men get into a scuffle, but a man immediately pulls Dylan away. After the presentation, the gallery owner, Howard Pace, praises Jonas for his work. He notes that he liked the way Jonas included the shooting incident at the station and reveals that he has another interpretation of the incident in his gallery. Dylan gets even more confused, so he asks Jonas what Howard is talking about, but Jonas claims he has no idea. When Sarah scolds Dylan for hitting Jonas, Dylan explains that the hologram is the exact replica of the patterns he's been seeing in the past few days. After leaving the gallery, Dylan sends Sarah a message to apologize for what happened. While Dylan is doing ring pull exercises at home one day, one of the straps suddenly breaks. As he tries to reattach the straps, Dylan finds a handbag full of letters and a passport of a man named Jake Redmond. Later that day, Dylan visits Howard's gallery to see the other exhibit featuring the shootout at the Grand Central Station. As Dylan stares at the artwork, Howard arrives and informs him that the incident involves a man who shot a woman and a detective in broad daylight. Other police officers then killed the shooter. Howard notes that the artist was inspired by the original photograph taken by a tourist from Cleveland. When Dylan looks at the notes under the picture, he discovers that the shooter was Jake Redmond. Soon, Dylan finds news articles about the murder and discovers that the shooter was motivated by jealousy. Dylan tracks down the return address in Jake's letters and contacts the current resident. When he stops by the apartment, Dylan shows the resident, Catherine Mills, the letters from Jake. Catherine asks Dylan why he contacted her, so he explains that he felt a connection to the female victim. Catherine then discloses that the victim, Evelyn, was her sister. According to Catherine, Evelyn met Jake while she was singing in clubs. Although the newspapers said that Jake was a convicted criminal, Catherine notes that he was never convicted. She contends that the police only claimed that he was to save face. Evelyn fell in love with Jake despite warnings about his bad reputation. Catherine surmises that Noah Marks, the detective who died with Evelyn, might also be in love with her. Catherine recounts that Noah came to see Evelyn one night to inform her that Jake is a violent criminal who killed a police informer. Evelyn, however, refused to believe him. Evelyn insisted that Jake would never hurt anyone and contended that they were destined to be together. Catherine hints that Evelyn must have felt that way because they had the same birthday. She adds that Evelyn must have been at the Grand Central Station to meet with Noah to go to his place in Millhurst. Catherine gives Dylan the letters Jake sent to Evelyn because she can't bear to read them. She notes that the only thing she needs to remember Evelyn is her pendant, which is similar to Sarah's. At the gallery, Sarah asks Jonas why he included Grand Central in his artwork. Jonas points out that it's a significant landmark and that he'd been working on it even before Sarah met Dylan. Sarah tells Jonas about the pattern Dylan sees every day, but Jonas insists it's just a coincidence. When Dylan asks about the Millhurst Express at the train station, the ticket booth attendant discloses that it has been out of commission for 30 years. Dylan looks at the schedule and sees Millhurst on the board, but it's been replaced with Poughkeepsie. When the clock hits 2:22, the crowd panics as a chandelier falls from the ceiling. Sarah stops by Dylan's apartment and gets concerned when she sees the notes he wrote on his windows. Her worries grow when Dylan tells her about Evelyn and Jake. Dylan asserts that Sarah is Evelyn and he is Jake because they died the same day they were born. Dylan tries to show her the letters Evelyn and Jake wrote, but Sarah refuses to read them. She argues that the patterns that Dylan has been seeing are meaningless, and she can find them anywhere in New York if she looks for them. Sarah asks Dylan not to pursue his investigation of his patterns. She still wants to be with Dylan because she feels something special when they are together. Dylan, however, tells Sarah that they can't be together because he thinks he will end up killing her the way Jake killed Evelyn. Dylan warns Sarah that they'll die the next day if they don't end their relationship. When Sarah leaves, Dylan smashes the windows in frustration. Later, Sarah stops by Jonas's studio to ask him again why he included the Grand Central Station in his art. Sarah thinks that Jonas is also connected to Dylan, but Jonas contends it's a coincidence. Jonas asks Sarah to go away with him for a few days because he thinks that her relationship with Dylan is destroying her. He asserts that Sarah is not safe in the city because of Dylan, but Sarah stresses that she loves Dylan because they have a connection. Meanwhile, Dylan goes to the rooftop of his building and attempts to jump, but is distracted by a plane flying above him. Instead of jumping to his death, he ends up looking at the sky in awe of the constellations. On April 18th, Dylan realizes that he's been seeing the day he dies through the patterns, so he looks for Sarah in Jonas's apartment to tell her about what he learned. Dylan breaks into Jonas's apartment and discovers Jonas's drawings of Grand Central and a wall with numerous pictures of Sarah. Dylan deduces that Jonas is Noah when he finds an empty gun case. As Jonas and Sarah head to the airport, Jonas receives a text informing him that his flight has been canceled, so he tells the cab driver to take them to Grand Central instead. Dylan rushes to Grand Central on foot after Sarah doesn't answer his call. Dylan inadvertently jumps on top of a cab while avoiding other vehicles as he gets close to the station. Dylan calls Sarah again to tell her that the patterns are showing him the day of their deaths. Jonas tries to buy 2 tickets to Millhurst, but the line has been shut down for 30 years. Instead, he gets tickets to Poughkeepsie when the attendant tells him that it will also take them there. The police arrest Dylan for jumping on top of the cab. As they attempt to cuff him, Dylan grabs an officer's firearm, but he slowly puts it down when the other cops aim their weapons at him. As soon as he puts the gun on the ground, Dylan makes a run for it. An officer fires at him, but he misses and hits a glass. Dylan smashes through the glass as he runs to the station. While waiting by the clock, Sarah realizes that the patterns are not mere coincidence, so she tells Jonas to stay away from her. Jonas pleads with Sarah to admit that she loves him, but he calls her Evelyn. As soon as Dylan arrives at the station, he calls out to Sarah. Jonas gets furious, thinking that Sarah told Dylan to come to the station. When Jonas confronts Dylan, Sarah observes the patterns in her surroundings and realizes that she's the pregnant woman. The crowd panics after Jonas pulls out his gun. Jonas initially points the gun at Dylan, but suddenly walks towards Sarah and aims the weapon at her because he'd rather kill Sarah than let her be with someone else. Dylan immediately runs towards Sarah to protect her. Jonas fires the gun and hits Dylan in the back. Dylan stands in front of Sarah despite his injury to keep Jonas from shooting her. When the clock hits 2:22 p.m., the police shoot Jonas dead. Due to his wound, Dylan collapses and sees a vision of Jake and Evelyn in their happiest moments. He then realizes that Jake was not the man who killed Evelyn. The police only framed Jake to protect Noah's reputation. When the clock strikes 2:23, Sarah is relieved that they didn't die as the patterns had predicted. She kisses Dylan and holds him in her arms as they wait for the ambulance. Months later, Dylan overcomes his fear of flying and finally becomes a pilot. As he heads to the airport, he glances at their apartment window to look at Sarah, who's taking care of their baby. At 11:15, Dylan realizes that they have broken free from the pattern when he doesn't see a plane in the sky.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.